Blood on Sacred Ground, the Jarafa Mosque Massacre story overview. In this documentary, we refer to the perpetrator using the pseudonym Abbas to maintain clarity and ease of narration for our global audience. While the details and events described are factual, the use of a pseudonym also reflects sensitivity to cultural and linguistic challenges in pronunciation. In December 2000, a horrific act of violence shattered the peace of a small Sudanese suburb. A former police officer named Abbas walked into the Jarafa Mosque during evening prayers and opened fire, killing 22 worshippers and injuring 30 more. This massacre, one of Sudan's most shocking non-war atrocities, exposed a devastating intersection of untreated mental illness, religious extremism, and institutional failure. This story explores the events leading up to the tragedy, the massacre itself, and the nation's response, a moment when trust in community, faith, and security was forever altered. Welcome to Truth in Tales, where we uncover the darkest true crime stories from around the world. I'm Yakuzi, and before we dive into this chilling case, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share to help us bring more untold stories to light. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. The Man Behind the Rifle. Abbas was not an unknown figure in Sudan. Born in the late 1960s, Abbas had served as both a military officer and a police sergeant. He was known for his discipline, but in the months leading to the massacre, something had changed. Friends, colleagues, and family began noticing troubling behavior. He was irritable, paranoid, and often withdrawn. The once dutiful officer became an unpredictable recluse. People close to him later testified that Abbas had developed a messianic complex. He spoke of divine missions and spiritual cleansing. He believed society had fallen into a moral abyss, and that only through violence could righteousness be restored. He often invoked religious language to justify his thoughts. In his mind, he was not planning mass murder, he was preparing for a holy mission. His background in law enforcement gave him access to weapons, and he used that access with chilling precision. On December 6, 2000, just 2 days before the mosque massacre, Abbas attacked a police station, killing 2 officers and wounding others. He escaped, leaving the police stunned and the nation shaken. Despite his actions, he was not apprehended. Inexplicably, Abbas was able to vanish into the streets of Khartoum. For the next 48 hours, he plotted his next attack, one that would etch his name in infamy. Chapter 2. A house of worship turned killing ground. On the night of December 8, 2000, Jarafa Mosque was filled with worshippers. It was a tranquil scene. Elderly men sat cross-legged in prayer. Young boys recited verses of the Quran. Women stood outside the main hall, waiting for their husbands and sons. Abbas entered the mosque wearing military fatigues, not unusual in a country accustomed to the presence of soldiers. He greeted a few people. He knew many of them. These were his neighbors, his fellow believers. He had prayed beside them, shared meals, laughed, listened. Then, with cold calculation, Abbas stood, pulled a Kalashnikov rifle from beneath his robe, and opened fire. The bullets echoed off the mosque's stone walls. Chaos erupted. People screamed, tried to run, tripped over one another. Within seconds, the floor was littered with bullets. Abbas moved methodically, firing into the crowd, reloading with chilling calm. According to eyewitnesses, he showed no emotion. One survivor recalled looking into his eyes and seeing nothing. Not rage, not hatred, just emptiness. When the shooting stopped, 22 men were dead. Another 30 were injured, many of them critically. Some died days later, in hospitals overwhelmed by the sheer brutality of the massacre. Among the dead were religious leaders, school teachers, elderly men, and students, pillars of the community. Chapter 3. Arrest without resistance. When the police arrived, they found Abbas sitting in the mosque, the rifle resting beside him, as if waiting for them. He did not resist. He did not flee. Instead, he reportedly smiled and said, "They were not true Muslims. God sent me." The quote, widely circulated by media, sent shockwaves through the country. Abbas believed he had done something righteous. He viewed his actions as divine punishment for a community he deemed sinful. The Sudanese government immediately launched an investigation, but the damage had already been done. Sudanese society, already fractured by civil war and political unrest, now had to grapple with spiritual betrayal within its own sacred spaces. Chapter 4. The nation reacts. Sudan went into mourning. President Omar al-Bashir declared 3 days of national grief. Flags were lowered. Religious leaders delivered sermons calling for unity and spiritual healing. At the funeral, thousands gathered to bury the victims, many wrapped in simple white shrouds. as Islamic tradition dictates. The massacre exposed deep vulnerabilities in Sudanese society. How could a mentally disturbed man obtain military-grade weapons? How had the police failed to capture him after the first shooting? And how could such evil take root in a place of peace? Outrage spread across the Arab world. International outlets like the BBC and the Los Angeles Times reported on the massacre, painting a picture of a country on the brink, not just politically, but socially and spiritually. The mosque itself bore the scars of the attack for weeks. Bloodstains on the marble floors, bullet holes in the walls. Worshippers struggled to return, afraid, grieving, unsure how to reconcile faith with the trauma of that night. Chapter 5. Insanity or Ideology. Abbas's mental health became the central issue during his trial. His defense argued insanity, citing erratic behavior, delusions, and religious hallucinations. Psychiatrists who examined him reported signs of paranoid schizophrenia, compounded by a belief that he was on a divine mission. But the court was not convinced. They argued that his actions were premeditated. He had planned the attack. He had chosen a symbolic target. He had used military tactics. This was not a spontaneous breakdown. It was intentional terror. In 2001, Abbas was sentenced to death by hanging. Human rights groups urged Sudan to consider mental health in criminal justice cases, but the government stood firm. For many Sudanese, Abbas's execution was not about punishment. It was about closure. Chapter 6. The Lingering Wounds. 2 decades later, the Jarafa Mosque Massacre still haunts Sudan. The country has endured countless tragedies, civil wars, famine, coups, but few incidents so vividly illustrate the intersection of personal trauma, religious extremism, and systemic failure. The victims are remembered each year in a commemorative prayer ceremony. A plaque at the mosque lists their names. Their families have not forgotten, nor has Sudan. Community leaders have used the tragedy as a call to strengthen mental health awareness, especially among former military personnel. The massacre spurred small, grassroots programs aimed at identifying PTSD and other psychiatric issues in veterans. A small step, but a meaningful one. The mosque was renovated in 2005. The bullet holes were sealed, the floors scrubbed, but those who lived through that night say they can still feel it. The moment when faith and fear collided. Epilogue. Reflections. Some massacres are remembered for political motives, others for religious divisions. But this was different. This was a man, broken by his demons, who turned a house of peace into a tomb. And even today, the echoes of that night remain. The Jarafa Mosque Massacre is not just a Sudanese story. It is a human story. One of a man broken by delusions, enabled by systemic neglect, and remembered for an act that turned a place of peace into a site of slaughter. As the world continues to face the threats of religious extremism and mental illness, the lessons of Jarafa echo louder than ever. They warn us of what can happen when warning signs go unheeded, when institutions fail, and when the sanctity of sacred spaces is violated by those we once trusted. In the end, it is a story of loss, of unanswered prayers, of blood spilled on sacred ground. If you liked this episode, don't forget to like and subscribe.